So welcome everyone. I hesitate to be the one to tell our arts commissioner to take a seat, but just we want to get started with our program. Welcome to all of you to the final presentation in our series of talks that we've been doing over the past several months on the topic of city cultural planning. This has been co-sponsored with the Cultural Policy Center at the University of Chicago and the Department of Cultural Affairs and Special Events. And I'm Betty Farrell. I'm the director of the Cultural Policy Center at the university. And we've been really excited in this series to bring a range of speakers who've been able to provide, I think, a really rich context for us in Chicago as we launch our own cultural plan. We've heard about cultural plans near and far in Austin, Texas, and Madison, Wisconsin, in London, Toronto, and Vienna and Berlin. So we've kind of ranged around lots of the world and been listening to all sorts of interesting parts of plans. We're particularly excited to welcome Ann Markusen and Gadwa Nicodemus, the co-authors of the study Creative Placemaking that they did in 2010 for the Mayor's Institute for City Design and the NEA. This is our grand finale for this series. It's particularly a pleasure to have both of them here. Ann Markusen is a professor at the University of Minnesota's Humphrey School of Public Affairs, where she directs the Arts Economy Initiative and the Project on Regional and Industrial Economics. She's worked very extensively, many of you know her work, very extensively on artist careers, on the special contribution that the arts can make to vibrant communities and to enhancing regional economic development, among other things. Ann Gadwa Nicodemus is a principal at Metris Arts Consulting. She comes with a background as a choreographer, as an arts administrator, and as an urban planner. And her work has been on urban art spaces and their importance for communities. So it's my pleasure to welcome both Anns to our presentation today.
Thank you, and thank you for coming. It's really wonderful to see you all here. There are some copies of Creative Placemaking up here. I want to tell you that the executive summary is not in here. For some reason, the NEA bundled it separately, and although we asked them to send it, they didn't. So if you'd like to read the executive summary, it's only 7 pages, and got a lot of beautiful graphics, and it's online. So the two go together, and that's not repeated in here. So I'd like to tell you first how we came to do this project, which was really a dream project. In 2009, President Obama appointed or asked Rocco Landesman if he would be his new chair of the NEA. This is Rocco Landesman in the northeast corner. Rocco Landesman is a Broadway producer. He owns 4 theaters on Broadway, and he's brought some of the edgiest drama to Broadway in the United States, including Angels in America. And he was thrilled to be called to service, and he agreed to come to Washington. And as his second in command, he chose Joan Shigekawa, who was the longtime director of the arts program at the Rockefeller Foundation in New York. Now, an interesting thing I want to underscore is that these two people were New Yorkers, had lived and worked and been at the top of their game in New York for decades, and they did not know each other when, this partnership began to happen. And I think that that just underscores how far we have to go in terms of getting out of the silos of the nonprofit and philanthropic world on the one hand, and, the commercial cultural industries, and I would also say the public sector. So they came to Washington. I'm going to finish the story first. They came to Washington in August of 2009, and Rocco Landesman looked at his budget and wept. It was really small. And he immediately started to go entrepreneurial. He looked around Washington. He said, oh my gosh, housing and urban development, labor, environment, energy, transportation. There are big agencies with lots of money. I'm going to go calling on the secretaries of. And so he did. And he would sit down with the head of the Housing and Urban Development Agency and say, arts and culture can really do a lot for your mission. Let's do something together. And he was very successful at this. And that's one part of the story, and you'll see that reverberated through here to some extent. The other initiative he took up right away was to go on the road. And he started to visit under a rubric of Our Town, various cities across the United States, and really use his presence to bring journalists out, to knock on the doors of the arts agencies and say, the nonprofit arts organizations, say, come with me down to City Hall. Let's go visit the mayor. Let's go tell him or her how important the arts and culture are to the city. And you might remember that when he came to Chicago, he said this really very controversial thing that, well, after all, Chicago isn't Peoria. And immediately people from Peoria started calling him up and saying, you think we don't have any arts and culture in Peoria? Come to Peoria, which he did. And he has really traveled the country over this period of time doing these different things. So this was really the context in which they approached us in the fall of 2009. They invited me to Washington to sit down and talk about writing a framing piece for an initiative on creative placemaking. And I can only say that I was so moved to be working with two such wonderful people, and I immediately turned to my frequent collaborator, Anne, and asked her if she would do this project with me.
So one of the things that's been most exciting for us is just the excitement and momentum that this framing piece has garnered. Not only did it underpin the NEA's own internal new creative placemaking initiative called Our Town, but also in just last year, a consortium of 10 top national foundations merged. They're called ArtPlace, and this includes the Ford Foundation, Knight, Rockefeller, so really big players. And over last year, 2011, and this year, they will invest $25.6 million in local creative placemaking initiatives all over the country. So it's not just the sum that's very impressive, but they also actually involve federal agencies as strategic partners, not financial partners, but strategic partners. So housing and urban development is at the table, agriculture, transportation, health and human services. So this, I think, is pretty unprecedented. And they've also reached out to the private sector. 6 major financial institutions capitalized a $12 million loan fund. So one of the things that's exciting to watch is that although both the Our Town and the ArtPlace grants are very competitive, it's raising awareness all the way down to the state and local level. City council members and planning agencies, their doors are getting knocked on. Can we apply for ArtPlace? Can we apply for Our Town? And it's changing the way they think about the potential for arts and cultural activities to support livability and vitality goals. In Connecticut, the public funding for the arts was doubled, but they're trying to prioritize more of these creative placemaking goals. So it's interesting to watch, and this is something that we've been noticing. Smaller foundations that aren't in the ArtPlace Consortium are also considering experimenting, merging community development branches with arts branches. So very interesting to watch. And I will pass it over to
I want to just also add that if you go on the Our Town site at the NEA, you'll see that it requires anybody who applies to be a partnership between a public sector agency and a nonprofit organization. And at least one of those has to be a arts and cultural organization, so cultural affairs in the city or so on and so forth. So really, they're being very directive about these partnerships. Okay, well, I'm going to talk a little bit about how we chose to do this study. They did want us to do research. Of course, they wanted us to show how important arts and culture is to the economy. And we have a whole section we're not going to talk about today showing the impact of arts and culture on the American economy as a whole, on output, on our trade balance, and so on and so forth. It's really interesting. Before I go into the methodology, I'd just like to acknowledge the significance of this audience. And in this audience, there are all kinds of different people. I'd like you just to look around as I ask people to raise their hands. So how many people are researchers in this audience? Wow, lots of people. You can be more than one of these things, by the way. How many people are artists? Nice, thank you for coming out. How many people are arts educators? Great. How many people are students? Wow, great. Arts and cultural organization leaders. Wonderful. Community arts and cultural advocates. Great. A lot of people wondering if they should put up their hand there. Community and economic developers. This is just amazing, or at least half a dozen people for each of these things. City of Chicago leaders and staffers. Great, thank you, and thank you for co-hosting us. And friends, old friends, a few old friends. And the intelligent lay public. All of you, right? Okay, right, exactly. So, and with this much expertise and creativity in the room and interest in this topic, we've really designed a very bare bones presentation so we can have a lot of back and forth. So we're expecting a whole half an hour to ask you about your experiences, to ask for critical feedback on our framework, and so on and so forth. So I hope you really jump into that. Okay, so when we were first asked to do this, by the way, we had about 3 or 4 months to do this, to do the research part, which was very daunting. They wanted us to really tell them what makes creative placemaking work. And, you know, that's a big challenge. And it's the kind of question people running a program like this in real time want to do. After all, they're already, you know, through the first year of the Obama administration almost. So Ann and I have had a lot of experience working in a very grounded way. We're both urban planners, et cetera, and I'm an economist and she's an artist, in Minnesota and California. But we didn't know that much about the rest of the country. So we couldn't just base it on our own, you know, experience. So after really thinking hard about it, we proposed back to the NEA and the Mayor's Institute on City Design that we do a scan across the United States for really interesting completed cases, pretty much completed cases of creative placemaking, where we could really see how the process had unfolded. And we made an effort to make those representative of both large cities and small cities, older industrial cities, new cities, places with, you know, unusual stories about how the process took place. And we called all kinds of people we knew and got lots and lots of suggestions, and we culled it down to 15 cases that we looked at in depth. I want to say this was a very inductive process. And we didn't design, you know, a framework and then go out and test it. I think it could be tested now. And we did not look at failures. I would like to do that. In earlier work on artist centers, we did look at failures, and we learned a lot from the failures. But we only looked at successful cases, and we didn't look at the many, many cases that are in process around the country. So there are many, many more. So we're going to talk a little bit about our findings. First of all, I'd like to just show you how we define creative placemaking. What is creative placemaking? Partners from public, private, nonprofit, and community sectors. So the actors, a very actor-oriented framework. Strategically shaped, that's the verb, the action. The physical and social character of a neighborhood, town, tribe, city, or region. So that's the object, the place part, around arts and cultural activity, very broadly writ. And these are the outcomes that we were looking for. And I have to say, even these frameworks, you know, evolved as we did our research over time. So we expected creative placemaking to animate public and private space, to rejuvenate structures and streetscapes, to improve local business viability and public safety, and most of all, to bring diverse people together to celebrate, inspire, and be inspired, all the intrinsic values of the arts. And in the end, after we did our very, you know, rapid and very exciting process, which you did mostly on the telephone, by the way, we ended up coming up with these 6 ingredients that we thought really characterized this set as a whole. And again, this is a work in progress, and I invite you to be both critical and add to this. First of all, some of these were really surprises to us, and one of them was that every single case had an extraordinary individual, an initiator, someone who had a vision and who had enough energy and smarts to find the partners and to really make the thing work. And often, you know, became much more complex as they went along. Some of them were artists, actually a lot. Joan said to us one, but I can't believe how many of these initiators are artists. And we said, yeah, isn't that interesting? Some were staff members in public agencies. Some were arts community leaders. Some were community developers, and you'll see that in our case studies. Secondly, and a very striking thing to us, all of these cases structured their initiative around something distinctive about their place. So instead of saying, oh, we're a city of a certain size, what are other cities doing? Oh, look what they're doing, let's do what they're doing. No, they tried to figure out what is really different and special about our place, what are the assets that we have, and how can we bundle those together to really create something exceptional and special about our place. All of them had to mobilize public will, and in two ways. First, they had to find somebody in City Hall, and that was often really tough. And often it was like one city council member that would, be an advocate for arts and culture. Sometimes it was a mayor. Often it wasn't mayors. In one case, mayors were the initiators. But that was one really important step they had to take. And secondly, they had to mobilize public will in a more general way, getting the word out, getting people in the larger community to think, yes, this is a cool thing, this would be a wonderful thing if this happened, and so on. They had to also attract private sector buy-in. And again, that's important because almost all of these projects involved, building or renovation or other investments that involved either the financial sector or private sector developers, et cetera. And all had to garner the support of local arts and cultural leaders. Now, you might think that that would be, just obvious. But actually, in a lot of communities, the arts and cultural sector, the existing sector, was kind of, hunkered down, going through these 2 decades of kind of cuts and arts thing, and they were just focused on their missions and keeping their organization alive, and the idea about doing something like outside of the silo wasn't that easy. So that was just another really hard sale. That's one of the reasons why I thought what Rocco Landesman did in his Our Town tours was just so brilliant. And then finally, they built partnerships, and this kind of echoes what Rocco Landesman himself did in Washington. We found that this had been happening out, around the country all along. People were building partnerships across sectors, across for-profit, nonprofit, commercial, community and public sectors, and they were building them across mission areas, and we'll show you that, and also levels of government. So getting something from the neighborhood, from the city, from the county, from the state, from the federal government, looking at where the resources are and putting them together. Okay, I'm going to go right into doing a case study for you, and we have 6 of these, and again, we're going to do them in a very bare bones way. This one is from Cleveland, Ohio. It's called the Gordon Square Arts District. This is the west side of Cleveland, the Detroit Shoreway, and the Capitol Theater was a major film theater in the 30s when it was a really robust working class neighborhood. And by the 1990s, it looked like this. Notice the police cars in the foreground. And at that time in the early 90s, this young man, a musician, decided that he really wanted to somehow get a hold of this theater, to renovate it, and to use it as a public space. And he got his friends and buddies to help him. And for several years, they worked hard. They finally managed to buy the theater, and they put every dollar they could raise into just keeping the roof from leaking. And eventually, a few years later, they teamed up with the Community Development Corporation in their neighborhood that had a long track record of building low-income housing, affordable housing, and also helping the commercial district stabilize. They came up with this idea of having a Gordon Square Arts District built around 3 theaters, because in addition to the Capitol Theater, there was another live theater venue across the street that was also shuttered, and had been shuttered for a long time, but was a viable building. And there was a youth group operating out of the 2nd floor of a church, helping kids use drama as a way of, thinking about their futures and their careers and solving community problems. So they put together this plan to go forward. But it turned out to be really hard to raise money for theaters, just cold, partly because all the major arts institutions in Cleveland are on the east side of the city, and pretty much the philanthropic foundations were committed to those. So instead, they really decided, this, by the way, is what the theater interior looked like when they took possession of it. They decided first to really go for a streetscape. And they started a process, which I'm going to try to illustrate for you by showing you how they raised money and how partners came onto this project. So first they really struggled to just do a feasibility study for the streetscape, and eventually they got a little list grant and an even smaller one, community development block grant, that their city council member for their district managed to get out of City Hall. And once they were able to do the feasibility study, they hired an artist to do the street design, and then they worked to put the money together for the streetscape. And that took a while, and almost all of this was public sector money in the beginning. So the city of Cleveland, Northeast Ohio, Greater Cleveland, so relatively local money, et cetera. And they built the streetscape, and they got some in-kind donations from their public power company. And then this was a lot harder to get the actual theater renovation money. And at first they got capital grants from the state, from the county, from the city. Finally, the big foundations came on when they really saw that they were serious. The streetscape came through, and they saw that they had viable plans, for patronage. And eventually, they also got other philanthropic contributions and new market federal and state historic preservation tax credits. So this is kind of took them about 12 years to do this. And the first theater, this is the streetscape, which I think came online about 2007 or 2008. Here's another, there's the artist design benches and skateboarding on the street. This is the Capitol Theater renovated. I couldn't get them to give me a picture with people in it, which is one of my big fundamental criteria, but you can imagine people going in and out. Here is a picture of the youth theater performing in the film theater on their stage. And this is the Cleveland Public Theater, the live theater, revived, people streaming in and out of the doors. So the two theaters that were already there have been renovated and are open to the youth group once again. And a new theater is being built for this group. So we're turning to a new venue.
So our next case study is Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. And one of Philadelphia's monikers is City of Murals. Through its Mural Arts program, over 3,000 murals have transformed once vacant walls into beacons of community pride. Currently, the Mural Arts programs works in about 100 different communities every year, and through arts education, they reach out to 2,500 youth and employ 300 professional artists every year in mural creation. So how did this come about? Well, it actually all started as an anti-graffiti experiment. In 1984, Mayor Goody hired Jane Golden, who still heads the program. She's a muralist, and he hired her to work with adjudicated graffiti writers. So immediately, she recognized their talents, but was able to provide them with a support structure to make community-sanctioned public art. So residents were involved in selecting the themes and in the design process. And over nearly 30 years, what has evolved is actually a really unique and interesting city agency nonprofit hybrid. So about half of the budget, it's $6.5 million every year. About half of the budget is from public funds, mostly the city of Philadelphia, and that's staffing and service contract provision. And the other half is raised by a sister nonprofit organization. So they raise grants and individual donations and earned income. And so the cross-sector nature of the work is evident not only in the structure of the partnership itself, but in the work that they do. These are recycling trucks that youth designed the wraps for, and this was a partnership between the City of Philadelphia Streets Department and Penn at the Design Center. So you can see how it bridges these different sectors, and the youth were able to learn about single-stream recycling through the process. Now, the Mural Arts program also works extensively in the criminal justice system. With about 400 inmates and ex-offenders every year, they teach them basic skills and education and give them a chance to make amends by restoring their community. Now, one of the criticisms that the Mural Arts program sometimes faces is from other public art players in the region. You know, it seems like they garner a disproportionately large amount of the resources. But it's because their work bridges these multiple agendas and priorities that they've been able to get the degree of support that they have. So it's art. It also has these placemaking benefits, these economic development objectives. Over 12,000 residents and visitors tour the murals every year. And community building. Actually, for the first 10 years of the program's existence, they were going into communities that often had never had any contact with a city agency prior to this, except for the police. And so they were able to use this entree to leverage additional public services for these underserved communities. So our next case is in Phoenix, Arizona. And as a sprawling new growth desert city, it might seem to you like an unusual candidate for a national creative placemaking standout. But it was exactly those factors, the harsh climate, the intense infrastructure demands, which created both more necessity and opportunities for them to create one of the most innovative public art programs in the country. So in 1986, they passed the nation's first ever public art master plan, citywide public art master plan. And they also identified a funding source, up to 1% of all capital improvement programs. And so you can imagine Phoenix, with its tremendous population growth and this new growth city, that all that infrastructure really can add up. It yielded $30 million for public art since 1986. Now, what might not be as readily apparent is the opportunities that this created. So the Office of Cultural Affairs had an opportunity to link disparate agencies in city and regional governments. So for instance, recently they've been using GIS mapping to identify opportunities for high-impact interdepartmental public art projects. And so this is often the agency that connects and brings these different agencies to the table. Since 1986, they've completed 145 projects and another 80 are currently in process. So one of the outcomes is that Phoenix is a more beautiful and vibrant city. If you're driving along Highway 51, the 5 landmark artist-designed pedestrian bridges and the sculptures lining the freeway barrier walls make it much more tolerable. However, the reason that we chose Phoenix was because the public art program goes much farther than providing a Band-Aid for urban spaces. We were really impressed by the ways in which they viewed the roles of artists. Artists are involved at the very beginning stages, the earliest design stages. So they have peer-to-peer voices with architects and engineers. And Ed Lebo, the director of the Phoenix Public Art Program, he credited this with the value as it allows room for the impertinent question to be asked. So the artists, their very presence and the work that they create can question our assumptions about how things should look and feel. And sometimes this is controversial. On Highway 51, there was an installation, the wall cycle of Ocotillo, which was basically these large pots, these sculptural vessels. And there was a lot of controversy. There, it was in the national media, people were criticizing this program, but what it did is it sparked this citywide debate about the role of the nature of public design and space, and it really expanded the public's understanding. The other thing that struck us about Phoenix was the ways in which they use infrastructure, they use public art to expand infrastructure's function. So it helps reveal processes that are often hidden from the public eye. So for instance, there's now public art lining the banks of the Salt River Valley canal system. And so it's helped transform this from a forgotten watercourse into a prized community asset, which, in a desert city, water is essential, but if you don't see it, if you don't value it, it's much easier to take it for granted. This is actually an installation of a space called Arizona Falls Waterworks, and it was a collaboration between artists and landscape architects. And it provides a new public space and a cooling waste station for recreational users of the canal system. So although the individual art installations and the program itself have won national awards and positive press coverage, why we really chose Phoenix was both the ways in which they view the role of artists to spark this democratic discourse and the ways in which public art can enhance infrastructure and therefore sustainability.
Okay, we're going to move to Portland. Portland was the first city to build a new light rail system in the United States, you know, after, well, I guess we once had them in some places, or maybe they were heavy rail. And when they first took the big step to do that, they were very concerned about ridership. Portland is a low-density city, everybody has cars and everything else. And a staff member in the Department of Transportation said, well, how about if we designed the stations to be expressive of the neighborhoods, and we invited artists to do that design work, and we put in place a consultative process where the neighborhood would be consulted about what the station would say about their neighborhood. And of course the engineers immediately said, oh no, we can't do that, it costs money, you know, we only have money for the, you know, bricks and mortar or whatever. And the guy persisted, and eventually he went all the way to Washington and asked the Department of Transportation, which has really deep pockets, you know, if they would be, and of course this was really important to them, the ridership issue, because this was going to be their really big pilot case. And they said, yes, we'll not only give you the money for the artwork, but also for the consultative process. So to make a long story short, they went out and went to different neighborhoods, and they hired artists, and the artists would meet the community. And I'm just going to give you 3 quick little windows into what the results were. This is in a North Side community, which is heavily Japanese American. And when they convened the community said, we want this station to tell the story of our incarceration, which was actually in a camp in the Portland area during World War II. And okay, that's a really big order. But here on opening day are these placards, which are now embedded in the station, but weren't quite done at the time. So here's an elderly Japanese woman reading a sign that says, alien ouster urged now. The artist actually reproduced the newspapers of the time, telling the story, bringing that history to life. Here's another example in a neighborhood that was African American and had been decimated by urban renewal, which happened in a lot of our cities. And here the artist created a piece called Second Growth, which is an accolade to the jazz, life of this particular neighborhood that had been once very important to it, which there still are elements of that now. And finally, they had a very strong participatory process actually in building too. So here's an example of a community workshop where children are invited to come in and help do the mosaics that were in the case. So a very interesting case of crossing over between art and transportation and using a consultative process as well. And really making these stations very special. And Los Angeles is doing something really quite similar, building their line. Okay, now we're going to move to San Jose, California, the capital of Silicon Valley, or the city that wants to be the capital of Silicon Valley. And San Jose has long had a really strong commitment to the arts, but mainly they spent money for 15 years building big new art palaces, this Museum of Modern Art, a new repertory theater, and a technology museum, science and technology museum, and still the downtown was dead. It was just dead. And they said, we have to animate these spaces somehow. And for one thing, they started a creative entrepreneur project, which was focused on artists, which I worked on, which was a wonderful project. We tell that story in creative placemaking also. But I want to tell the other story from San Jose, which is about this amazing biennial called 01. And it's a celebration of the marriage of art and technology. And how did it start? Well, a Silicon Valley entrepreneur, actually a woman who ran a public relations firm, got this idea in the early part of the last decade to start something which would try to marry art with technology, to get the Valley beyond its geeky, the thing, and to acknowledge that increasingly visual art and music, sound, and movement were infused into the products of Silicon Valley, and to try to expand the economy in that direction through this marriage. And they formed a nonprofit organization called 01, and they decided to have a biennial every other year where they would call for artists both around the world and in Silicon Valley to come forward with projects that married art with technology. And here's an example, Ruben Torres right here. I don't know really what it is, but you can see it brought a lot of people out to the middle of the city. And to work with all the nonprofit arts organizations in the San Jose area, which are quite dispersed, to be the venues for all these events that would happen, which is a 2 or 3 week event. And so this is a really low budget operation. At the beginning, the city gave them some seed money for it, but after a couple of years, there's no public money. It's all mainly corporate sponsorships and philanthropic money that goes into this, and it's been very, very successful. Here are some examples from the biennial 2 years ago last fall. This is something that involves showing people what it's like to be a parent. And this, by the way, is in City Hall. This is San Jose City, a beautiful building. And again, it's usually empty, animating the space. This is in another smaller venue. Again, I don't know exactly what it is. They provided me these photos, but you can see the techie, arty thing here. And they also have a green car competition. And they asked artisans and engineers to come together and design ideas for green cars. And they have a green car parade. And I can't tell you exactly what these things are doing, but they're pretty amazing. And then they all go to the convention center, and all weekend long, anybody can come and talk to the artists and the engineers about their green car and just spend, it's like a, just a mini show. So the point of this art and technology effort is also to create a new sense of who Silicon Valley is, that it marries art with technology, and also hopefully to really spawn some new businesses that come out of these, really interesting ideas of these different people.
So our final case study is Arnoldville, Louisiana, population 1480. So this is the heart of Acadiana. It has French, Cajun, German, Spanish, and Native American influences. And in 2006, native son George Marks, a painter, returned home to care for his ailing father. His father was dying. And George was a fine artist. He had his gallery representation. He was thinking about moving to New York to take his career to the next level. But he was struck by the town's decline. Storefronts were closed. The former meat market was now a drug house. His favorite bakery was shuttered. And instead of moving to New York, he decided to convert the old auto parts store into the town market artist cooperative. So this housed a cooperative artist gallery, his own studio, New News, nightlife and cafe, which hosts music events and French cooking shows from chefs in New Orleans, and also the Frederick School, which is a nonprofit school that invites the residents from the area to contribute their local talents. So this is arts, languages, culinary skills, environmental sustainability. So they're all working together. This existing human capital was just brought together. This is an example of one of the Frederick School's events, a French conversation language table that happens monthly. So from the very beginning, George Marks and his compatriots had a lot of political savvy. It wasn't customary to think regionally in where they were in Arnoldville, but instead of pitting Arnoldville against its neighboring towns, they decided to work together. So some of the programs, the literary festival or the music jam would be in the next town over to try to build a whole regional identity for the area. And they worked, they actually turned perceived negative liabilities into assets. So for instance, people in the town lamented how far away they were from the highway. We can never get a big box store. That's why we're falling by the wayside. But instead, if you don't have those sort of threats, it might allow a new identity around indigenous arts and cultural assets to percolate and not be sort of squashed by Walmart. They also identified a profit-sharing model. So they got local businesses to have skin in the game. There would be, the grocery store would have an exhibition, and if a painting sold, they got a cut. So it wasn't much at the beginning, but just everybody had a little skin in the game. So what have the accomplishments been? This is Tom's Bow and Fiddle Shop, the weekly fiddle jam, which is hopping, and this used to be a drug house. Visitors from as far as Canada and Haiti and Africa participate in the French monthly conversation tables. Arnoldville has acquired a cultural district designation from the state of Louisiana, which allows them to have sales tax exemptions for the sales of original artwork and qualify for historic preservation tax credits. And property values have risen, bucking national trends. Actually, very close to the time our case study was published, sadly, the Town Market Artist Cooperative was consumed by a fire. But there was just so much community outpouring of support that they have rebuilt and they reopened. And actually, they just recently returned from a visit to France because the French government has invited them over to explore potential collaborations and how this can be a model for more exchange. And with that, I'd like to turn to some of the challenges that cut across all of our case studies. Countering community skepticism, I'd like to start with first because I think Arnoldville really speaks to that. So George and his compatriots, they adopted an act first, apologize later mentality. And they anticipated that they would get skepticism from the local community. So first they reached out. They reached out to the parish, which is equivalent of county tourism offices, and the French consulate of New Orleans. And only once, people started noticing, hey, more people are filling up. Restaurants are busier, more people are buying groceries. Only then did they seek the blessing and support from, the town fathers, which they got. The old water treatment plant, which was defunct, was sold below market to a relocating sculptor for his live work studio. And, the city government was instrumental in having them acquire the cultural district designation. Forging and sustaining partnerships and assembling adequate financing. I think the Gordon Square example speaks really well to this. It took partnering theaters and a community development organization to meet the challenges of creating an entire arts district. And those partnerships were hard work. It took away fundraising momentum from their own individual budgets, but together they were able to accomplish a really important goal. Regulatory hurdles, clearing regulatory hurdles also was illustrated in Gordon Square. For 2 years, they fought the Ohio Department of Transportation to try to get the street narrowed. And only after a 2-year battle were they able to win, basically on semantics. There was new thinking about, this could be for traffic calming, and finally then they were able to get what their vision realized. But you can have the best idea in the world, and if the regulations aren't set up to support it, you can only go so far. Ensuring maintenance and sustainability. This came up with the physical public art projects, such as in Portland and in Philadelphia. Over time, they learned more about what materials to use so that the murals wouldn't flake off in a few years, and to prioritize, the public art installations in the city, in the light rail system that would need less maintenance dollars. But you have to budget, for the whole lifespan, which is really hard because it's much easier to get new funds for an exciting, sexy new project than it is to keep something going. And avoiding displacement and gentrification. So how do creative placemakers work to ensure that economic revitalization is equitable, that small businesses and long-term residents aren't forced out by rising rents or property values? This is a tough challenge, and actually one of the case studies that we looked at in Los Angeles, the Hollywood Boulevard area, their whole approach was to create increased technical capacity, a training program for small nonprofit arts organizations that were at risk of being forced out due to the overheated real estate market. So it can cut both ways. And finally, developing metrics for performance and evaluation. I think this is where, This is the toughest challenge. In all of our work, we asked about outcomes and impacts, but these were done very quickly. It's really difficult to say what the outcomes have been, and now the stakes are much, much higher because there's a lot of new resources and momentum and interest in creative placemaking. So, local initiatives are scrambling to figure out what works, why, what are the lessons learned, and then what can we take credit for, and what can we claim as impacts. And on a national level, our town, the NEA, and ArtPlace are working to try to develop indicator systems to look at livability and vitality impacts of their investments. But it's difficult. In some of my other work, I've done an in-depth study of how specifically artist spaces, live, work, and mixed-use facilities benefit the artists and arts organizations, the in-house artists and arts organizations using the facility, and the surrounding neighborhood and physical impacts. And with you combining methods, it is possible to tease out the story of neighborhood change and try to get to what you can attribute to a particular creative placemaking intervention. But it's also very resource intensive. So I think that that's an opportunity for all of you that raised your hands as researchers to strengthen the field. And with that, I will actually invite Anne to help.
I want to thank you very much. It's really been lively, and please feel free to contact us. And if you have other, thoughts, especially critical ones, please pass them on to us.
Thank you very much.